Hey everyone, welcome to today's Explainer. Today, we're diving into a massive wave of updates hitting the Canada Labour Code, and honestly, these are going to fundamentally reshape the future of work. Whether you're an employee trying to figure out if you actually have to answer that late-night email, an employer scrambling to navigate a whole bunch of new compliance rules, or really just someone fascinated by where our modern economy is heading, this Explainer is definitely for you. We're going to break down exactly how these legislative changes are going to impact your daily grind, and we'll also zoom out to look at the huge macro-level shifts shaking up the broader Canadian economy.
All right, let's look at our roadmap for today. We'll be moving from the shifting labor landscape right into new leaves and protections, the highly anticipated right to disconnect, and some major health, safety, and tech modernizations. Then, things get a little spicy as we dive into the Section 107 debate and the future of collective bargaining.
Part 1. A shifting labor landscape. What's changing and when?
Now, I know employment law can sometimes sound, well, a little dry, but I want you to ask yourself a very real question. Is your workplace about to fundamentally change? Think about your own daily routine for a second. Think about that dreaded ping you get on your phone from your boss at 9 p.m. when you're just trying to relax and watch Netflix. Or think about how you might handle asking for time off during a really tough family crisis. The rules governing literally all of these interactions are being redefined at the federal level right now.
And we're not talking about some sci-fi distant future scenario here. This is happening fast. Starting in late 2025, expanded personal leaves officially take effect. Then, moving into 2026, we're going to see the rollout of the right to disconnect and some major equal pay rules. And by 2027, significant modernizations to occupational health and safety limits will be fully enforced. The scale and the urgency of these updates are profound, and to be honest, employers are already scrambling to get ready.
Moving on to Section 2, New Leaves and Protections, time when you need it most.
Let's zoom in a bit on those immediate personal protections. There are three big pillars here. First up is a brand new pregnancy loss leave. This gives up to 8 weeks of unpaid leave for a stillbirth and up to 3 days for other pregnancy losses. And here's the crucial part. Those first 3 days are actually paid if you've been with your employer for at least 3 months. Second, bereavement leave is getting a major expansion, offering up to 8 weeks of unpaid leave following the heartbreaking loss of a child. And third, a completely new leave of up to 16 weeks of unpaid, job-protected time is being created specifically to support families who are welcoming a child through adoption or surrogacy.
But look, we all know new rights only matter if they're actually enforced, and the federal government is taking that enforcement very, very seriously. Federally regulated employers really need to pay attention to this number, $100,000. Failing to comply with these new leave rules, or even just failing to keep the proper paperwork, can trigger administrative monetary penalties that scale all the way up to that massive figure. So yeah, it's a pretty clear signal that compliance is absolutely not optional.
All right, Section 3, the right to disconnect, redefining after hours.
To tackle the modern epidemic of burnout, we've got the right to disconnect. But okay, there is a huge misconception I need to clear up right away. This is not some blanket absolute right to just ghost your boss the second the clock strikes 5:01 p.m. Instead, it's actually a strict requirement for employers to develop a formal written policy about work-related communication outside of your scheduled hours. And the kicker? They have to develop this policy in consultation with their employees, mapping out what the legitimate exceptions are and setting clear boundaries.
Now, what good is a rule if you're terrified to use it, right? That's exactly why the new updates include incredibly robust anti-reprisal protections. An employer absolutely cannot intimidate, dismiss, or discipline an employee just because they asked to exercise their right to disconnect, or even if they just asked a question about their rights under the policy. This ensures the rule isn't just an empty promise on a piece of paper, it's a framework you can actually use without fearing for your job.
You know, alongside the whole disconnecting thing, the code is also making moves on equal pay. Basically, if you're a part-time or temporary worker doing substantially the same job as a full-time employee, you can no longer be paid less just because of your employment status. The process kicks off when an employee requests a formal wage review. From there, the employer is put on a strict 90-day clock to conduct that review and respond in writing. They either have to prove the current wage is fair due to seniority or merit, or they have to bump up your pay.
Section 4, Health, Safety, and Tech, modernizing the rules.
Workplaces have changed, and the hazards have too. Stuff we just didn't fully understand a few decades ago. By 2027, federally regulated workplaces are going to be hit with some rapid-fire safety updates. For example, the government is dramatically lowering the exposure limit for radon gas down to 200 becquerels per cubic meter. They're also rolling out strict new exposure controls for extreme heat and extreme cold, which is a very direct adaptation to climate change. And this is fascinating. They're even introducing new safety mandates for managing exposure to engineered nanomaterials. It just goes to show how much the code is having to evolve alongside advanced manufacturing.
And hey, it's not just a federal thing either. The provinces are stepping up. A really great example from the sources is Ontario's new Power Act. This legislation directly takes aim at the whole nickel and diming of workers by explicitly banning employers from charging employees for mandatory uniforms. Plus, it sets up reimbursements for essential stuff like protective headwear and creates a really innovative occupational exposure registry to track a worker's exposure to hazardous chemicals over their entire career.
Now this is wild. The very definition of workplace safety is expanding out of the physical world and into the digital realm. As artificial intelligence creeps into the workplace, labor organizations like Unifor are demanding some serious protections. They're arguing that workers absolutely must retain rights over their personal data. But even more importantly, they are pushing hard for a total ban on AI algorithmic management tools being used to discipline workers or make termination decisions. Because let's be real, an algorithm shouldn't be the one handing out pink slips.
Part 5. The Section 107 Controversy. Intervention versus Free Bargaining.
All right, let's zoom way out. We've talked a lot about the day-to-day, individual perks, but now we're hitting a massive, incredibly controversial political battle. Our sources lay out two completely opposite perspectives on the government's use of Section 107 of the Canada Labour Code. On one side, the federal government argues that using Section 107 to end strikes or force binding arbitration is absolutely necessary to protect the national interest, keep critical supply chains moving, and ensure economic stability. But on the exact opposite side, the Unified Labor Movement, groups like the CLC and CUPE, view this as an unconstitutional suppression of the charter-protected right to strike. They say it totally destroys free and fair bargaining. Now, as an explainer, we are definitely not picking sides here, but you absolutely need to understand the sheer magnitude of this clash.
So why is this blowing up right now? It all comes down to one number 8. According to the Canadian Labour Congress's submission, the federal government has actually used Section 107 to intervene in labor disputes 8 separate times since just 2024. Think about that. Before this, the provision had essentially never been used like this in 4 decades. Doing it 8 times in such a short window is literally unprecedented in modern Canadian labor relations.
To really grasp why the unions are so intensely concerned about this, listen to this insight from McGill University sociology professor Barry Eidlin. He hits the nail right on the head. He points out that if employers genuinely believe the government is eventually just going to step in and stop the strike anyway, the whole threat of a strike just vanishes. And without that leverage, the entire incentive structure that makes collective bargaining work completely breaks down.
And finally, Section 6, the future of bargaining. Where do we go from here?
So with tensions running this high, how do we fix this? Well, there are some massive proposals on the table right now. First off, there's a push to establish a new special mediator role, which is designed to jump in and help resolve disputes way before they ever escalate to a strike. Though unions are warning this better not just become a delay tactic. Second, stakeholders want to tackle the messy issue of misclassifying independent contractors. They're looking at maybe borrowing from British Columbia's trucking model, which sets minimum rates to essentially remove the financial incentive for companies to misclassify workers. And lastly, there's a strong push to implement successor rights. This would protect union contracts from just being wiped out when a company engages in contract flipping, which is a huge stressor for vulnerable workers.
It's a really fascinating tension, isn't it? On one hand, the Canada Labour Code is clearly expanding to offer these incredible new protections for individuals, from pregnancy loss leaves to the right to disconnect. But at the exact same time, macro-level collective bargaining is facing unprecedented government intervention. So I want to leave you with this to ponder. Will these upcoming reforms ultimately build a stronger, more modernized framework for all workers, or will the frequent government interventions fundamentally break the collective bargaining table for good? It's a deeply complex, high-stakes question, and however it plays out, it's going to define the Canadian workplace for decades. Thank you so much for hanging out with me for this explainer. I hope it cleared up some of these massive changes. Keep learning, and I'll catch you next time.